What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Welcome back, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week I was honored to speak with James Stamboni, a figure painter from Westchester, New York, whose paintings explore themes of religious and Western iconography and portraiture. Throughout the conversation, we talk about the surreal and controversial symbolism found in his work, his love for teaching and music, and the effect that a life-threatening illness had on his work and career. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week I am so excited to be here with James Stamboni. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Kimberly. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So listeners, just a little bit of transparency. James and I went to undergrad together at SUNY New Paltz. You studied in painting and drawing, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you go for the BFA?
I did.
Yeah, cool. And so I forget what classes we actually had together, but I was in the photo department, and I'm really excited to talk to you because I think in my view of your work, you have what seems like a lot of photo influences, but when I spoke to you prior to this recording, some of those ideas and references weren't in your mind. So I'm kind of curious to hear where your imagery came from and style choices and things like this. But maybe to start, we can give listeners kind of a brief overview of maybe what your paintings look like. So I do have this podcast aired on 2 platforms right now. One is on YouTube. So if you would like to follow along and actually take a look at some of the visuals, highly encourage you to do so. It's the Art Uncovered podcast. Just search that on YouTube and you'll find it. But for those of you who are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, things like this, we will do our best to try to, or I will do my best to try to describe what James's paintings look like. Okay, actually, James, why don't you take the mic? If you had to, let's say that you were stuck in an elevator with someone and they said, "Oh, what kind of paintings do you make?" How would you respond?
Oh, the elevator pitch. That's
The elevator
terrible
pitch, you got
because I'm
it.
so long-winded. Do we want to talk about my paintings in general or about the 3 ones that we're going to focus on?
That's a great question. Why don't we speak general and then we could choose specifics from there?
Okay. I am a representational figure painter, focus on allegorical history paintings with what some might deem surrealist imagery, and my own kind of niche collection of visual symbolism and allegories. Lots of bell peppers.
There are a lot of bell peppers. Okay, so I'm going to expand on this a little bit. So figurative painting for sure. Now, what I'm seeing kind of as a theme among all of your paintings is this really strong focus on a strictly white background.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these figures, many of them seem to be in almost stopped in mid-motion, like if you were jumping and then someone took a photograph with your legs in the air, that kind of stop motion that, again, to me resembles photography. But many of your figures or your subjects here are in mid-motion against a white background, and then there are a lot of other objects in the background also. So I'm seeing some butterflies, some insects, more butterflies, spiders. I don't know if that's like a fairy or a hummingbird or something like this. So the images are quite, I don't know, would you say surrealist? That was the kind of the word that I used when I was preparing questions for you.
Well, the thing about surrealism is we both went to art school, so that we know that surrealism is a club that was started by Andre Breton, who has been dead for some time now. And even though he invited a lot of dead people into his club, he never had the opportunity to invite me. And I also like the Frida Kahlo thing where he's like, "You're a surrealist," and she's like, "What does that mean?" And he talks about higher reality of dream consciousness. And she's like, no, no, that's not what this is about at all. This is my life. And I, like, I don't think my paintings are about dreams. I mean, dreams are important. I'm sure the idea of dreams fit into my work, but it's not like the focus.
So what was your focus? Because I would have thought dream.
Okay. Well, and I hope this doesn't come out weird. It's kind of religion.
Explain,
Um,
please.
yeah, so I was agnostic. I think I'm even less than agnostic now because the war. I did some more reading on the Old Testament, and I'm just like, wow, no wonder people feel encouraged to kill each other after reading,
Mm.
Judges or Joshua. But I was raised in a Catholic family, and I was exposed to a lot of religious art, both through that and art history, and I love the drama of it. And I love the exhilarated feeling of faith. And now I mostly have that feeling in the context of jazz, which
Mm.
is a much less dangerous thing to consume.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I go for a lot of my imagery is meant to be emotional and evocative, like a religious experience. And, I think there's more than that in there. Um, but yeah, I think like a lot of my imagery is drawn from wanting to tell stories like a Renaissance or Baroque artist who's, retelling religious allegories, but my allegories are for a more contemporary world.
Mm.
I
Can we
think
talk
that's,
about this one a little bit more? Ooh, is this Spanish here?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, how
Don't
do you
ask me
pronounce
to,
it?
I don't speak Spanish either, but
I
she
was just
does.
gonna ask you to pronounce.
Yeah, that's actually a tattoo on her arm, which you can't see because she's wearing a long sleeve shirt.
What does it translate to?
Do not tell me these things.
Do not tell me these things. And this is a painting of a seeming. Is this a female character?
Yeah, she's a Mexican American indigenous
Mm-hmm.
young woman that I taught when she was a high school student.
Mm. And she is sitting on what looks like a gymnastics pommel horse.
Hmm.
And she has a sledgehammer in her. It's almost like she's about to swing it or mid swing. And she is surrounded by a floating snake, some birds, butterflies, something that looks like a tethered animal skull of some
Hmm.
sort.
So I intentionally take usually a very blunt, centralized visual theme and then say, okay, well, how can I change this? So equestrian portraiture, it's a thing.
Mm.
And this is almost a sense of humor, replacing the horse with a pommel horse and then a horse skull.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant. So you come up with one idea and then you abstract the shit out of it.
Yeah, yeah, while making a very representational painting. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Sorry to use that word abstract, because
Oh
James's
no, I
work.
don't I don't find it offensive. I mean, the whiteness is an abstraction. It's a very
Mm.
intentional, very absolute abstraction.
Yeah. I just want to clarify one thing. 'Cause those of you listeners who are not looking at James's painting, they're quite realistic. I mean, I could still see your hand and your brush marks, but there's really no abstract quality in terms of the rendering of the images. I guess when I said abstract, I meant more the story.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to go back to something you said about the white space, because
Mhm.
it is so prevalent in all of your recent paintings. Can you talk about a bit about this white background? And actually, maybe before you answer, if you don't mind, this is where I thought that you were referencing stock images. Like if
Mhm.
you type in flat screen TV and you put that into Google, what you'll see is just a long scrolling list of flat screen TVs against white background. Yeah, you told me that your reference was not to photography. So I'm curious if you could, yeah, explain what this white space is for you.
Well, I do want to address the stock image thing first because I think that's very fertile and will kind of resolve some things we were talking about before with visual symbolism and stuff.
Cool.
So
Let's do it.
the stock image, as I understand it, the idea is to create a generalized space where you have almost like a platonic idea of the chair of all chairs. And I think I am doing a fairly similar thing. I just, my reference was stock photography. It's old religious painting. But at the same time, I'm taking these stories and I'm making a generalized image of an event or a dramatic idea. And then I'm creating a space where the symbolism is abstracted to the point it's detached from the blunt, most direct thing. I think a good example would be an apple, right? Apple is the most loaded symbol in Western iconography.
For sure.
There's no detaching that from Genesis. And I prefer to use a bell pepper. Same approximate size, shape, color, a little bit more interesting in the form, but it's a New World plant. So the Western consciousness has only had a point of reference it for 500 years. And in a way, I've liberated the image by using a pepper, which is more free associative. I've given the viewer the opportunity to tell a new story that isn't pinned to 2,000 or 3,000 years of Judeo-Christianity. And I think stock imagery is designed in much the same way. It's intentionally something that can be adapted to the purpose of the person who's using it.
100%.
So the short answer of the white space is that I don't want to waste time painting backgrounds. They're not important to me. But the more academic answer is that I'm framing this image. I'm telling you what the symbols of this story are, and I'm not including information that would just muddle that, like what am I going to put in the background? The ocean, a forest, those have meanings of their own. They're not neutral. The white ground is neutral. And there's kind of an interesting path that took me to there because I didn't do white backgrounds at first. I was painting on sheet metal to just escape the need to paint a background. And that was in reference to religious painting. You have the old icon paintings, again, that word icon, where you have the metal leaf on the background, which you find more in Eastern Orthodox, but I'm sure the Catholics did it too. And in those paintings, the gold is supposed to represent, I guess, some metaphysical, spiritual space. In my paintings, I mean, I am dipping into that, but there's also an element, when I was in school, they talk a lot about reproduction and postmodernity and, how do people interface with your work? Most of the time, they don't see it in person. They see it in reproduction. And I took that as a challenge. Well, how can I make a painting that you can't photograph?
Interesting.
Because you light the thing differently. Even if you stand in a different part of the room, the way the light reflects on the background is going to change. But this also created a problem compositionally is when lighting the painting changes it so dramatically, in order to make it so the composition will always work, you need to stick with some fairly conservative composition. So all those paintings are more or less pyramidal compositions, like straight Renaissance stuff. And I made a dozen or so of them, and I was just like, okay, I'm sick of this. I want to take big swings compositionally. I don't want to be making the same painting just with different imagery.
Right.
And that's how I made the jump to white, because you can leave a section open and it's always going to stay the same way. So you don't have to worry about it not working in that empty space.
Thanks again for tuning in. We're just going to take a quick break here for a few announcements. First, we're excited to announce that Art Uncovered is now on YouTube. So if you are listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like this, and you're curious to have some visuals of myself, my guest, and their work, head over to Art Uncovered Podcast on YouTube. Also, we're excited to announce that we are now officially a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you'd like to ensure the continuation of this podcast, please donate. Any amount that you can contribute will be very much appreciated. You could donate on our website at artuncoveredpodcast.com. And that's it for today's announcements. We'll now continue with my conversation with James about his current exploration of using white as a neutral background for iconic symbolism. So if you don't mind, if we can maybe go back to that one painting that that we started talking about, one of the more recent ones that is painted on hardboard and has that white background. So let me go to that screen again here. So the title is Self-Portrait as a, oh my goodness, what word is this? Fluoroquinol. Okay, that this sounds like some kind of chemical.
Mhm.
Induced cripple, comma, my body was violated, comma, my trust betrayed. What is going on here?
Well, I mean, we were going to talk about this sooner or later, but now
Yeah,
might be the time to bring it up.
I think it is.
So, back in 2006, I stubbed my toe, didn't heal right, went to a doctor about it, and they prescribed me an antibiotic that two other doctors would later tell me I didn't actually need. Too late. So fluoroquinolones are a class of prescription antibiotics, and in about 0.02% of the population who take them, they cause a wide-ranging set of symptoms that are poorly understood by the medical establishment, but that mostly center around connective tissue damage. And yeah, that happened to me. It cost me my ability to work as a high school art teacher and the ability to work in pretty much any other context other than making my own paintings.
Yeah,
Um,
and just to understand the severity, listeners, James, you said that you can't leave the house without braces on your legs, right?
yeah, no, I can't walk on hard surfaces. My apartment has rugs everywhere. I do okay, but I can walk about 400 feet on pavement before my knees start giving out.
Fucking wild. Fucking
Yeah.
wild.
And that wasn't even the worst part of it. The worst part is that for whatever reason, I started reacting to other things as if they were the original drug. And at first, it was just things that were contraindicated, meaning you're not supposed to take them together. But that was 5 months out. Presumably, the original fluoroquinolone was out of my system. There are conjectured reasons as why this might be happening, but that's conjecture, so I'm not going to speak to that here. And then after I had that second reaction while using just a very common SSRI, I had a third one using St. John's wort. And I'd been using the St. John's wort before the SSRI, and it hadn't caused me any problems. But when I looked it up, the SSRI was contraindicated. The St. John's wort was contraindicated with the SSRI. So I deduced that they were forming chains, and not long after, the range of things I reacted got wider and wider. It spread to foods, and it got to the point where there were about three things I could eat without causing connective tissue damage. I expected to die, and when you're an artist and you're looking towards death for a couple of years at a time while you try to fight this thing off, you make a list. What are the things I most need to paint if I get the option?
Hmm.
And that was number one. That painting was number one. So, and actually, I painted this before I even figured out the thing that finally saved me. There were a couple of other experimental treatments that bought me some time, so to speak. And this is what I made while I was buying myself time.
Wow.
So, it is a self-portrait. And the pepper having become my most iconic substitution when I'm, playing with symbolism, I just filled the thing with peppers because that's me. And yeah, the antlers in that picture, there's some on my head, but there's also some growing out of the toe that I originally injured, and they're piercing my knees, which are the part of my body that has taken the most damage
Hmm.
from the drug reactions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's me kind of struggling through this, and yeah, there's like a martyr complex in there, and some of it feels silly now that I don't think I'm going to die anymore. But I really did think I was going to die at the
Yeah.
time, if it,
Yeah. Question, where does this painting currently live?
in my parents' basement.
Yeah, is it hard to look at? Like even just looking at it on screen, what is it
No,
like for you?
it's not hard for me to look at. I'm very good at making peace with these kind of things. It maybe part of that is like an autism thing, but I just um like it happened to me. Like there's
Yeah.
no erasing it. I live with it every day. If I ever need to walk outside, I have to put braces on. So it's just an honest reflection of my life. And if anything, I'm kind of glad to be like, well, I don't feel that miserable anymore.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious when I first, because it's been years, James, since I caught up with you, and when you sent me your website, my assumption was, oh my God, he's doing so great. His work is so strong, and he's been so productive over the last couple of years. But that was a misunderstanding on my part because there were a number of years that you weren't even able to make work. So I'm kind of curious to how you got back into art after not having been able to physically do it for a number of years.
Well, it was a physical issue. My mind never left. The real problem started, I was painting through the beginning of my illness, but at one point I started reacting to the solvents, and that put a kibosh on that.
Mm.
Um, I also I made multiple attempts to return to work as a teacher, and you have so many spoons. I was prioritizing, just getting through the workday, especially because my body was already physically quite ravaged. So, the teaching took a priority. And then, after I was forced out of that by the progression of my condition, yeah, there were an additional, I guess, 2 years before I was able to reverse things enough where the solvents either weren't affecting me or the effects of the solvents were limited enough that so long as I only opened the jar while I was cleaning the brushes, I was okay.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I just want to switch to your website again. So all the or I guess the two paintings that we've spoken about so far, they were since you got a little better, right?
So the first one I made was the one of me with antlers growing through my legs being crucified.
Hmm.
The second one was the first one we talked about, the woman with the sledgehammer, and this was the
Yep.
third.
Okay.
So the sledgehammer was before I realized I'd contained everything.
So that's this
Um,
one.
yeah, like the basically, yeah, I had contained things a bit, but it was coming back, the illness. So I made this, I really rushed through it in about 3 months to try and finish it before it got to the point where I wasn't functional again.
Mm.
Um, and actually, when I finished it, the young woman in this painting, a former student of mine when I was teaching high school, it had sold. Someone purchased that painting while I was making it in advance,
Wow.
and
Wow.
they were coming to pick it up. And, I was like, I don't think I'm going to use her name,
Hmm.
in this privacy and all that. But like I told her, like, you have to come by and see it. And it was in the middle of COVID. She's like, but you could get sick. And it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive that much longer anyway. But,
Wow.
you know, I feel on a certain level that if you do not see this painting in person, that I will have failed on some level and I would never be able to forgive myself. So I was sealed in my bedroom and she comes in to the studio so that, in case she had COVID, she couldn't get me with it or anything else. And we just, she sat there for about an hour talking to me over the phone, about the
Wow.
painting and what it meant to both of us. And,
That's really special.
yeah,
That's really
she's such an
special.
amazing person.
Mm.
She's an activist, is I guess her primary thing that she does. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
an
That's awesome.
incredible person.
And then the last painting that we're going to talk about here was the most recent of the three, it looks like, right?
Yes.
And this one's
So
titled Ripple in Still Water. Is that a
mhm,
Grateful Dead reference?
it is a Grateful Dead
Yeah,
reference.
cool, cool.
Well, I have a fun story about that because this is also a former student.
Hmm.
And when I was in college, my main two musical spheres were jazz and extreme metal. And the two things that those circles have in common is that they both hate the Grateful
That's
Dead.
really funny. I remember you playing. Was it what instrument was it that you would play in the halls? Was it a saxophone?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I
Oh God,
remembered.
I was obnoxious. But yeah, so I let myself be like, told that just ignore this huge swath of music, and so one of the big things that turned me around on that is one day the kid in the picture is playing this song in my
Sure.
classroom when I come in after school, and I was like, "What song is that?" it's a great song. And he looks at me like I've got three heads because the entire student body knows that I'm an encyclopedia on music. And they're like, Stamboni, it's the Grateful Dead. It's
Yeah.
great. And I was like, well, I guess I've been a fool all these years.
It's so
And I'll tell you, the Grateful Dead were very useful during the bedridden years because if you want, something you just play and, okay, here's an hour and a half of continuous music, the Dead have got you.
Oh, I love this. I love this so much. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is an image of your student. It looks like they are floating. I mean, they are floating. I don't think they're tethered by anything. It almost looks like they're rising up to heaven. They have an upward gaze. There are a couple of insects, butterflies in the background.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess this is the last one we'll kind of dissect, James. So, where did this one come from?
Well, everything you said is pretty on the nose because he died
Oh
about a
my
month
God.
into about a year into my illness.
Oh my gosh, that's so terrible. And this was a student?
Yeah, yeah, he was
Oh my,
18 years old.
oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, we all were. He was very well loved in the community, and when I actually finished the painting, I had a bunch of, oh, and that's the worst part because, it was 4 years later when I was actually able to make the painting. And it was right before I left the town where I worked in the high school. And I just had a bunch of, his childhood friends came over. We ate a big celebratory dinner that it looked like I was going to live. And then we looked at the painting together. And all of them are
Wow.
adults now, and he never will be.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's so sad. So you painted this after he passed.
Hmm. The photograph of his face was taken by his then girlfriend, who I remain close with.
Okay.
And the model was another student who posed for it.
Mm,
And yeah, we just tried to match the lighting of the existing photograph we had. And the little alligator in the bottom corner there
yeah.
is a plastic toy that he and two of his friends got me um, before I took ill, and it's
Mm,
a it's a mother alligator with three babies on her back. So
wow.
yeah,
Wow. It sounds like you were really inspired by your students.
they're great people. I mean, that's if I could give like one piece of advice, if you want to be eternally young, work around young people because if you come into them with positivity and support, like they'll just feed you, like
Mm,
yeah.
mm. That's great. Maybe this question's a little too personal, but do you think you'll ever be able to go back to teaching? I know that you stopped because of your illness.
It's unlikely for multiple reasons. Just the physical demands. Yeah, I would like to teach. It's just a matter of, I don't think my knees could consistently make it through a day. And
Mm,
especially with the protocols I have to keep from potentially coming into contact with the topical version, because there are eardrops and eye drops, the drugs that do this to me. And hypothetically, actually, to tell a Grateful Dead story,
Yeah, let's
apparently
end on something nice.
yeah, well, no, no, it's just why I'm afraid of everything. Is apparently not that long ago, like in the past 10 years, some dude was cleaning off a soundboard that hadn't been used since the 70s, and he found himself going on an acid trip because somebody had just left like dried acid on the
Oh my
surface of the
God.
Grateful Dead soundboard. And I'm just like, we don't know how long this antibiotic remains active. So if someone's it's made to absorb through your skin if it gets on their sleeve and but is it paranoia? I don't know. We don't have scientific data. So I value my life to the extent that I'm careful. And he can't work in a public setting like that.
Yeah, yeah, understood, understood. Well, James, it has been so wonderful catching up with you. I'm so glad that you're here and that you're still making work and that you're well enough to share your stories and your work with us. Yeah, it's an honor.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Like you're helping me out enormously. And
Hmm.
I've listened to a few of like 3 or 4 of them, and I really love what you're doing. It's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do you have any shows or anything coming up? Maybe an opportunity where listeners could go and see your work in person?
Yeah, I think the first of my metal pieces is scheduled to be at the Pelham Arts Center. The opening is going to be April 25th. I think the
Okay.
show opens before that, and it's going for the following month, but I don't have exact dates yet.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll include that information in the on our website and also on social media and things like this. And
Mhm.
I'll make sure that this airs before your show so that we could hopefully use it as some marketing material. All right, so listeners, if you are around on April 25th at the Pelham Art Center, go and see James's work in person. Hopefully, I will be there to support as well. It'd be great to see some of you all in person. James, thanks so much again.
No, thank you for having me. It was an honor and a pleasure being here.
All right, listeners, that's all for today's episode. Be sure to tune in next week as I will be talking about topics such as women's work and healthcare with artist Diana Puglisi. In the meantime, don't forget to visit us on YouTube, Art Uncovered Podcast, and our website, artuncoveredpodcast.com. There you will find featured and past episodes along with links to our social media and donation pages. Thank you always for your support, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.